The professor laughed when the janitor raised his hand. "Since when do people like you understand academic research?" The room went silent. The janitor slowly lowered his mop. Then he asked one question that made the professor stop smiling. And within minutes, a prestigious university was facing a scandal nobody saw coming. Before we reveal that question, subscribe if you believe intelligence should never be judged by someone's job, appearance, or skin color. It was almost 9 a.m. at Hamilton University. Dr. Charles Whitmore was presenting his latest research to a packed lecture hall. Students filled every seat. Professors sat along the walls. University administrators watched from the front row. And near the back stood Marcus Reed, a black janitor who had quietly worked at the university for 12 years. Marcus wasn't supposed to be part of the discussion. He was only there because he had been cleaning the hall when the presentation began. But something on the professor's screen caught his attention. Marcus stopped pushing his cart. He stared at one chart, then another. His expression changed. He had seen those numbers before. Not in a textbook, not in a university report, somewhere else. Dr. Whitmore proudly announced that his research had uncovered a groundbreaking pattern involving thousands of student records. The room applauded. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Finally, he raised his hand. The professor noticed him. He smiled sarcastically. "Yes?" Marcus spoke calmly. "Professor, may I ask you something about that data set?" A few students exchanged amused looks. Whitmore leaned against the podium. "Of course." Then he added with a smirk, "Though I'm not sure this is really your area." Some students laughed. Marcus didn't react. He simply looked at the screen again. Then he asked, "Why does your research contain a data set that was never supposed to exist?" The professor's smile disappeared. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Professor Whitmore laughed. "That's an interesting accusation, from someone who doesn't understand research methodology." Marcus remained calm. "I didn't make an accusation." He pointed toward the screen. "I asked a question." The room became quieter. Whitmore turned toward the projection. "What exactly do you think is wrong?" Marcus looked at the chart. "The student identification numbers." Several students leaned forward. Whitmore frowned. "What about them?" "They're from an older database." The professor's expression tightened. Marcus continued. "I know because I used to work with the university's records department." A student whispered, "The janitor." Marcus heard it. He ignored it. Whitmore folded his arms. "Cleaning buildings doesn't qualify you to analyze academic research." Marcus nodded. "That's true." Then he added, "But 12 years ago, I wasn't cleaning buildings." The room went completely silent. Marcus explained that before becoming a janitor, he had worked in university data administration. He had helped maintain archived student records, and one particular database had been permanently sealed after an internal audit. It contained incomplete records, duplicate entries, and several datasets that administrators were forbidden to use for published research. Whitmore's face had gone pale. Marcus pointed at the chart again. "That database was shut down." Whitmore immediately interrupted. "You're mistaken." Marcus reached into his cart. He pulled out a small envelope. Inside was an old university archive request. He placed it on the nearest desk. The department administrator picked it up. Her eyes widened. "This is an archive authorization." Marcus nodded. "And the number on your presentation matches the archive database." Whitmore stared at him. "That proves nothing." Marcus looked directly at him. "Then answer one question." He pointed at the screen. "Why does your study contain records from students who were never enrolled?" A murmur swept through the lecture hall. Whitmore's confidence disappeared. The dean stood from the front row. "Professor Whitmore." Whitmore turned toward him. "I can explain." But before he could continue, the university's chief auditor entered the room. He was holding a laptop. He looked directly at Marcus, then at the professor. "We need to shut this presentation down." The dean's face tightened. Why? The auditor opened the laptop. Because Marcus is right. And then he revealed something far worse. The fraudulent dataset wasn't just used in one research paper. It had been used in 16 published studies. 16 studies. The number hit the room like a thunderclap. Students who had been laughing minutes earlier were now staring at Professor Whitmore. The dean slowly turned toward him. 16. Whitmore shook his head. This is being misunderstood. The chief auditor opened his laptop. It isn't. He displayed a list of published studies. Different professors, different departments, different years. But one thing connected them all. The same suspicious dataset. Marcus watched silently. Then the auditor revealed something even more disturbing. The data hadn't simply been used accidentally. Someone had altered it. Student records had been duplicated, removed, and rearranged to produce specific statistical results. The room fell silent. A graduate student raised her hand. If those results are fabricated, how did all those papers pass peer review? The auditor looked toward the faculty. That is exactly what we're investigating. Whitmore suddenly pointed at Marcus. He's manipulating this situation. Several heads turned. Whitmore continued. He worked around university records years ago. He could have altered those files himself. Marcus stared at him, then slowly shook his head. I don't have access anymore. Whitmore smiled. You expect us to believe that? Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out an old employee identification card. He placed it on the table. My access was terminated 12 years ago. The auditor examined it. Then his expression changed. Professor. Whitmore looked nervous. What? The auditor turned the laptop around. Your credentials accessed the archive database 3 months ago. Whitmore's face went completely pale. That's impossible. The auditor shook his head. The system says otherwise. Students began whispering. The dean demanded an explanation. Whitmore insisted his credentials must have been stolen. But Marcus noticed something on the screen. A small timestamp. He leaned closer. That login wasn't made 3 months ago. Everyone looked at him. Marcus pointed at the timestamp. It was made 3 months before that. The auditor checked again. Marcus was right. Someone had manipulated the access logs. And whoever did it understood the university's security system. The dean stared at Marcus. How could you know that? Marcus paused, then gave an answer nobody expected. Because I designed part of that system. The room went silent again. Marcus wasn't just a former records employee. He had helped build the university's original data security architecture. And suddenly, the fraudulent research wasn't the biggest mystery anymore. The biggest mystery was this. Who had been using Marcus's old system to hide it? The question changed everything. Who had been using Marcus's old system? The university immediately sealed the research department. Faculty members were ordered to surrender their devices. Professor Whitmore was escorted away from the podium. But Marcus wasn't finished. He asked the auditor to pull one specific record. Show me the original access logs. The auditor hesitated. Those were deleted. Marcus nodded. I know. Then he walked to the computer. A few students watched in disbelief as the man they had mocked as a janitor began navigating the university's security architecture like he had designed it yesterday. Within minutes, he found a hidden backup. The room erupted in whispers. There were hundreds of archived login attempts. Most belonged to legitimate administrators, but one account appeared repeatedly. A senior research administrator, Dr. Evelyn Grant. The dean's face changed. That can't be right. Marcus looked at the screen. It gets worse. The backup contained messages between Grant and Whitmore. They discussed manipulating student data before several major research publications. But there was one message that made the entire room go silent. Grant had written, "Use Marcus's old system. Nobody will suspect the janitor." Marcus stared at those words. For the first time, his calm expression cracked. not because they had insulted him, because they had deliberately used his identity as camouflage. The dean immediately ordered Grant into the room. Minutes later, she arrived with 2 attorneys. She denied everything. Then Marcus asked her one question. "Why did you access my security module last year?" Grant froze. She looked toward Whitmore. He looked away. The auditor opened another file. A financial trail appeared. Research grants, consulting payments, private transfers. Millions of dollars had been connected to studies built on manipulated data. The scandal was no longer academic. It was financial fraud. The university president finally stood. "We need federal investigators." Grant's confidence collapsed. Whitmore lowered his head. But Marcus noticed one final file hidden inside the backup, a document labeled with his own employee number. He opened it. His eyes widened. Someone had been preparing to blame him for the entire operation. And the document contained a forged confession. The forged confession was designed to destroy Marcus. It claimed he had secretly accessed university records, manipulated research data, and helped Professor Whitmore fabricate academic results. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Marcus smiled. Not because it was funny, because he knew exactly where they had made their mistake. He pointed toward the document. "This signature isn't mine." Whitmore looked up. Marcus continued. "My signature has always included a middle initial." The dean examined the page. He was right. The forged confession didn't. But Marcus wasn't finished. He asked the auditor to compare the document's creation timestamp with the security logs. The answer was devastating. The confession had been created after Marcus's access privileges had already been permanently removed. He couldn't possibly have created it. The evidence cleared him and exposed the people who had tried to frame him. Federal investigators eventually uncovered the larger scheme. Manipulated research had been used to strengthen grant applications, attract donors, and protect the reputations of powerful academics. Several publications were retracted. Research funding was frozen. Administrators resigned. Professor Whitmore lost his position. Dr. Grant faced serious legal consequences. But Marcus received something more meaningful than revenge. The university publicly acknowledged what it had done. The man they had treated as invisible was invited to the front of the auditorium. The dean stood beside him. "I owe you an apology," he said. Marcus looked at the students. Then he answered calmly, "You don't owe me respect because I'm standing here." He paused. "You owe everyone respect before you know what they can do." The auditorium erupted in applause. Students who had once laughed at him now stood. Marcus looked toward the cleaning cart, still sitting near the back door. He smiled. He never hated the job. He hated the assumption that the job defined him, because the professor had made one terrible mistake. He saw a black janitor. He never bothered to see the person behind the uniform, the person who understood the system, the person who remembered the records, the person who asked one simple question. And that question didn't just expose one professor. It uncovered an entire academic fraud network. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with shouting. Sometimes it walks quietly into the room, pushes a cleaning cart into the corner, and asks the one question nobody wants answered. And when the truth finally speaks, titles don't matter. Degrees don't matter. Power doesn't matter. Only the evidence does. If this story reminded you that never judge someone's intelligence, character, or potential by their job or appearance, subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, hidden identities, and unexpected twists.